The financial services sector is the second largest industry in the Bahamas. According to the central bank, it accounts for approximately 10 to 15% of our nation's GDP. Banks and trust companies are the largest financial contributor within the sector, making their success critical to not only the financial services sector, but to the Bahamian economy at large. Today, I will be speaking with the directors of the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies, the representative body for banks and trust companies operating in the Bahamas. We'll talk about what the organization is doing to ensure the banking industry continues to thrive. Keep watching. This is You and Your Money.
You and Your Money is brought to you by the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies.
Welcome to You and Your Money, everyone. I'm Christina. Joining me today to talk about AIBT, the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies, are AIBT directors Gowon Bowe and Todd Beneby. Gowon Bowe is the CEO of Fidelity Bank Bahamas Limited. Todd Beneby is the managing director of Sterling Bank and Trust Limited. Welcome, Gowon and Todd, to the show.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Christina.
Now, Gowon, for viewers who aren't familiar with AIBT, talk about its history and role as a representative body for banks and trust companies in the Bahamas.
Well, you know, it's quite interesting. Many years ago, we all have heard about Swiss banks and Swiss bank accounts and what that had in terms of the connotation. But the reality was all of the major international banks that were in Europe, if they didn't have an operation in the Bahamas, they were not considered serious. And so when you look at the banking industry and financial services at large, the Bahamas was a choice jurisdiction going way back from the early 70s. And the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies formed in 1976, effectively to have a uniform voice, a chorus line, if you will, to be an advocacy for the financial services sector, to provide what I'm going to say training and development so that people became familiar with all of the matters that were impacting the industry, and more importantly, to become, if you will, good corporate citizens and allowing the network of members to actually pool resources and provide services to the wider Bahamian community. So in short, we are an association that has brought together what once were the international banks that had operations in foreign jurisdictions in the Bahamas, and they are the ones who are now becoming more independent and, if you will, still continuing to be the pillars of our second pillar, the financial services sector.
You know, Gowon, I love how you actually said, you know, the uniform voice that the financial services sector actually now has. So, Todd, what are some of those key principles and best practices in AIBT's Code of Conduct that actually helps to maintain the Bahamas' position as a leading international financial center?
Thank you so much for the question. You know, the association recognized that the Bahamas is a leading international financial center, and it has agreed that these codes are important in making certain that Bahamas continue to maintain its as it supervises the center itself. Some of the things that we want to make certain is that we're in consistent conformity with the money laundering prevention and also the preservation of confidentiality within the industry itself. So some of the best practices that we talk about is ensuring that the Bahamas continue to maintain its international standard practice by recognizing the Basel Committee and also on bank supervision and also the Wolfberg AML principles. And it also reaffirms the standard of confidentiality and privacy as required by law in the banking practice. And it also evidenced the association's commitment to the legal and regulatory framework governing the banks and trust companies in the sector. But more importantly, it also maintains the position for the bank, or the Bahamas actually, to be a leading international center as they conduct international business. And there's so much pressure on these industry, in particular for the Bahamas.
You know, having to pay close attention to code of conduct in any given environment is vitally important. So, Gowon, how did AIBT help members navigate the impact of the pandemic?
Well, you know, what's most important is information, and we hear that information is king. So how is it that we keep persons informed? We know that business was not as usual. It moved from what was more of the face-to-face contact to what was being more digital, and that's the way of the world. It looked at how did it keep its members informed about events that were taking place, notwithstanding the actual COVID elements that were taking place. So ultimately, our role and responsibility is to ensure that as we see emerging trends and, if you will, initiatives that are taking place globally, how do we ready our member firms in order to combat those or in order to conform with those? And so ultimately, attempting to keep the professional development seminars, the engagement with the government authorities in terms of their initiatives and how they were complying with various, I'm going to say, country-to-country principles, keeping people abreast of what was taking place in terms of the COVID rules and regulations and what you could and could not do from a physical standpoint. And then more importantly, about keeping the mantra that the Bahamas is open for business. I think, you know, COVID created this shell shock that said that things shut down. And the reality was AIBT and its member firms, if you will, debunked that myth by saying that whilst we may not be able to welcome you into our shores the way we did before, we certainly can engage with you electronically and ensure that there's no interruption in the services being provided. And that's what a principal and key financial service center is responsible for doing.
So now that the shift has actually been done in terms of the pandemic, what are some of the issues within the sector that AIBT is currently advocating for?
You know, I would say to you that the pandemic only created what is a disturbance as opposed to bringing up new issues. The reality is we continue to have to face the tax threats that have been imposed on the Bahamas by the OECD and EU in terms of ensuring that whilst we are compliant with tax rules, that we are advocating along with our peers in the financial services sector globally that there's a level playing field, or at least a set of rules that we all understand. I don't know that it will ever be level. We know that AML and counterterrorism financing is going to continue to evolve because there are new forms of delivery of services. And so in this digital era, naturally, you're going to have to place greater reliance on digital technology, and that's a shift in how things were done before. And then ultimately, we have emerging industries. So when we think about it, you now have the digital asset space. You now have those players that are talking about fintech. And so ultimately, I think it is important to understand that we will always have evolution in the financial services sector. What we were in the 1950s and 60s is not what we're going to be in the 21st century. And so we have to continue to evolve and face tax, AML, and new sectors and subsectors within the industry emerging.
Listen, in the digital era, there's a whole lot of information, and you said it a little bit earlier, there's information overload. So Todd, AIBT has a strong commitment to the professional development of Bahamians working in the sector. What are some of those key areas of training that AIBT actually focuses on?
Yes, you know, that sector is very vibrant and very liquid. And so it's so important for us to make certain that we are ahead of the curve in most instances, to make certain that our practitioners within the industry are well equipped enough to stay ahead of the curve. And we have several initiatives, including our summer internship program that we have for most of our member firms, and a lot of them take advantage of it. And also we have the 6-week language immersion program, both internationally and locally. So those are some of the things that AIB try to focus on to make certain that, hey, we are ahead of the curve with the most current things that are occurring. And as the market develops, we try to stay ahead with that market development.
I love that you're talking about the summer internship program. I mean, you know, there's so many opportunities out there. Now, Todd, I also want you to talk to us about AIBT is the founding partner of the Nassau Conference. Can you share a little bit about the history of the conference, its objectives, and who it's for? Yeah,
well, we're now in our 15th year of the Nassau Conference. And what this conference actually does, it brings together, you know, from the government sector, the private sectors, those persons, the students in particular as well. And we bring practitioners from around the world who have the expertise and who are aware of those developments that are occurring. And we bring them all together and we share those best practices and share that information so that information is disseminated at the same time. And so the market or the industry at one time receives all that information one time, and we're all on the same page as we move forward, being a vital part of this financial sector that we want to cherish and pride so much.
Being on the same page at the same time is so important. Gowon and Todd, we're going to take a quick break now, but when we get back, we'll talk about this year's Nassau Conference. You're watching You and Your Money. We'll be right back. Welcome back to You and Your Money. If you're just now tuning in, today's show is with AIBT, the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies in the Bahamas. With me are AIBT directors, Gowon, Bowe, and Todd Beneby. Just before the break, we were talking about the Nassau Conference, AIBT's annual professional development conference for the international financial service sector in the Bahamas. This year, the conference is celebrating its 15th anniversary. It will be held at Bahama Convention Center on September 14th. Gowon, you're the moderator for Session 1, the financial and macroeconomic outlook for the next 12 months. Talk to us a little bit about the session, who's speaking, and why is this session important for members of the sector?
Well, you know, in the Bahamian vernacular, we say that we shouldn't be talking fool off the top of our head. And so that means that we need to have persons who are actually engaged in activities, international and domestic, that will be able to bring that perspective. When we look at our member firms, we have such a depth of knowledge and experience within them. And so we've drawn on a senior executive from 𝗘𝗥𝗘𝗘𝗥 Bank who's been in the Bahamas almost as long as AIBT, if my memory serves me correctly. And certainly when we look at Mr. Ramirez, his, I'm going to say, relationship management and his engagement with international clients allows us to think about, well, what is the macroeconomic economy outside of the Bahamas? What is taking place in inflation? What is taking place as it relates to the war in Ukraine? What is taking place with the Pillar 1, Pillar 2 on the tax initiatives in terms of multinational corporations, and how we see the United States, the position they're taking versus the position being taken by Europe. You know, we live in a global arena and we have to appreciate that geopolitics is as important as our domestic politics. And so when we start thinking about macroeconomic factors, us in the Bahamas have to be aware of what's taking place in the world around us. Because if we're believing that we're the only player in this game, then we're going to be sadly at a loss. And so from that perspective, the objective really with this session is to say, well, what is it that we can anticipate in terms of activity, both in the international economies, the international markets, and more importantly, some of the regulatory issues that are impacting decisions where high net worth individuals and others who rely on wealth management services are being impacted.
I'm sure that this session is going to have a whole wealth of information that many persons who are participating will be able to glean from. Now, in Session 2, Governor John Roll, Governor of the Central Bank, will be providing an outlook on the state of the Bahamian economy for the next 12 months. There have been reports published on the state of the economy. What do we already know?
Well, we know that, you know, it's a roller coaster ride that has taken place in our domestic economy. We've seen the downward trend when we had COVID that shuttered our borders. We've seen the emerging rebound that is taking place and hoping to continue that. We've seen things like resurgences in the actual global pandemic that has had impacts, and now we're seeing inflation. So it seems like, you know, every time we get onto that roller coaster ride upward, we get to the top and we take this rapid ride down. And so it's about understanding how we balance that. With volatility comes opportunity, but it is really success is only where opportunity meets preparation. And so having a session with the governor is allowing us to understand, well, what are the macroeconomic factors within the Bahamas and how do they fit in with the global economy that I just spoke about in the first session. So ultimately from that perspective, we know that the Bahamas goes as largely North America. It's our largest trading partner. And we always say when North America catches a cold, the Bahamas catches pneumonia. And so from that perspective, it is, I think, putting it into context so that we are ready for success. We are preparing ourselves. And like I said, although volatility is sometimes frightening, it produces opportunity. And so we need to ready ourselves so that whatever the opportunities, we are ready to take advantage and be successful.
Gowon, you know, you really touched on one of my favorite quotes, right? When preparation meets opportunity, you're guaranteed success. So, Todd, let's talk to you about moderating Session 6, which is a panel discussion. Can you share what that session is about and your take on some of the discussion topics?
Yes, thank you so much. You know, the theme this year for the conference, as we said, is you know, bolstering business, accelerating the transformation. Mm-hmm. And my segment deals with where do we go from here? Now, what we try to do in this segment is that we're trying to, look at the challenges and also look at the opportunities. And how do we, we grow this business called the Bahamas Financial Services here in this financial sector in particular. So we're trying to make certain that we get ahead of the curve, like I said earlier, and we're trying to pinpoint those challenges and then taking those challenges and making opportunities out of them and see how we can really grow this business. So I'm really looking for a good time. We have an excellent cadre of persons on that panel that brings you a really broad perspective from the different opportunities that will present itself.
I'm sure the panel discussion is going to be lively, right?
Yes, I'm hoping. That's what I'm working towards.
Yeah, so what are some other sessions on the agenda, Todd?
Yeah, so, Gowon talked about the section that he's dealing with. We'll have, there's an interesting aspect that we're going to have too, where we have a fireside chat with the minister in particular. And then we're also talking about some of the different aspects. We talk about the digital environment that's, currently that's here that we're dealing with. And there's also some aspect about, the international legislation that have occurred around the world. How does that impact our industry, and how do we take our industry over those hurdles that have been created? And then there's a very interesting aspect that also has developed is relating to investment and residency. So that's going to be a very interesting topic that a lot of people are going to be looking for, especially those international investors.
I see you're having that fireside chat. I'm sure there are many persons that's going to want to be a part of that particular segment as well. Now, Gowon, I want to talk briefly about networking. I know there's a whole networking luncheon at the conference. How important is networking for professionals in the banking and financial services industry?
Well, we know the world is turned on relationships. And so the reality is if you are hearing for the first time in the public discourse or in the publications in newspapers and gazettes, information regarding your industry, then you're probably not sufficiently invested in relationships with those who are in the know. Ultimately, it is important for you to know your colleagues. It's important for you to know your regulators. It's important to know your client base and to know key decision makers in each of those stakeholder groups. It doesn't mean that you form personal and friendships necessarily, but it certainly means that you can grab a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, you can have lunch, and have the discussions about, well, how is it that I can, one, serve you if you're a customer? How is it that I can comply with your laws and regulations if you're a regulator? And then more importantly with your peers and colleagues, how is it that we expand the economic pie as opposed to cannibalizing it? So when we put into context what relationship means, the opportunity to network, and I think for some of us, we hear about the COVID fatigue, and people just want to get out and if you will, re-engage with their peers. And I think from that perspective, the relationship management aspect of such a conference is always one that you can never underestimate. And ultimately, having the ability to call on a name by an individual that you've shook hands with, or in this environment, pump fists with, is always going to be that more advantageous, because you can actually pick up the phone and say, do you remember when we had that conversation on the sidelines of the Nassau conference?
You know, an old saying that I grew up with is not just about what you know, it's about who you know. So, Todd, before we go to the break, what's the cost of the Nassau conference, and where can people actually go to register?
Yeah, when we looked at the cost aspect, and when we looked at the cadre of persons that we have at the Nassau conference, we came up with a fee that, really it's a nominal fee. It's about $400 plus VAT that's included. A conference like this, really, you'll pay much more for it. So, relatively fee for about $400 plus VAT for the registration. Now, persons can go into our online service. If you type in Nassau Conference, it'll land you right into that page that'll allow you the opportunity to register for both the conference and also for the boot camp. So once they type in Nassau Conference, it'll pop you and land you straight into that registration page and give you all the details about the conference itself.
Wow, when you think about the level of investment that you have to make in something such as this, when you think about the fireside chat and the panel discussions and all of these, the wealth of information that's going to be shared, I'm sure persons will be excited to go ahead and get themselves registered. Now, Gowon and Todd, we have to take another break, but we have more to discuss when we get back. This is You and Your Money. We'll be right back. Welcome back to You and Your Money. Still with me are Gowon Bowe and Todd Beneby, directors of AIBT, the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies in the Bahamas. Before the break, we talked about this year's Nassau Conference, a professional development conference for professionals in the international financial services sector. The conference will be held on September 14th at the Bahamas Convention Center. But just before that, on September 13th, AIBT will be hosting its annual Financial Services Bootcamp at the Bahamas Convention Center. Now, Todd, what is AIBT's Financial Services Bootcamp and who can attend?
Yes, the Bootcamp really is a half-day practical, hands-on experience for those persons who are more junior staff members, for the mentors, those senior persons who need some refreshing, and like it says, it's a boot camp, so it really sort of refresher in some instances, and also gets you over that hurdle in terms of what it's all about. But what's so important about the boot camp is that it also allows those junior persons to really get a real feel of what the industry has to offer, and gives them that opportunity to really interface and react with those different industry partners in particular, and also the practitioners in that industry.
Wow, I don't even know if I've even heard about there being a boot camp at a financial services conference before. But Gowon, at this year's boot camp, there are 2 fintech sessions. What other areas of growth in the financial services sector are you seeing?
Well, when we talk about fintech, has been around for quite a while, and there's so many aspects to it. There's the technology, there's the actual assets that are being deployed, there's the new services that are being established that is using technology in order for its delivery mechanism and engagement with the various stakeholders. And so from that perspective, ultimately, this is an opportunity. You're not going to have a drill sergeant shouting down at you, but you are going to have persons who are, shall we say, the generals who are going to give you the experience that they have had thus far in industry, and what are some of the practical learning tips that they, will be beneficial. It's not an opportunity for you to get all knowledge, but it is an investment in the future. And so when you think about it from the perspective of how do I get myself ready, well, I'd like to talk to those who've been there and done that. And so this provides that opportunity. We have Sand Dollar, the actual central bank digital currency that is ultimately just a digital format of our Bahamian dollar. And so from that perspective, there's so much wealth of knowledge that can be shared by these industry professionals and ultimately mentors, because there is a session allowing for what I'm going to say the mentorship and the ability for younger students and entry-level professionals coming in to talk with those persons who've been around and a bit long in the tooth, like Todd and myself.
Gowon, you talked about the generals that's been in the area for quite some time. Now, Todd, at this year's boot camp, there's also the mentorship forum that Gowon just mentioned just now. What can attendees actually expect from this forum?
Yeah, Gowon talked about the networking aspect of this whole thing and how important and vital it is to the industry. So we're starting with this mentorship program that provides a platform or launch pad, if you wish, for these new persons or younger persons in the industry to be able to talk to these different senior personnel from AIBT and also from the senior persons within the AIBT center of persons as well. So you'll have an opportunity to meet a Gowon Bowe, for example, or the governor or somebody like that. These senior officials who, like Gowon says, hey, they've seen the ropes, they've been through it, they've done that, and they can share those in things. So it creates an opportunity to really help to forge and support our industry, because as the years go on, we're going to eventually come off the scene, and those young persons are the ones who are going to be actually taking on the scene. So we're creating that platform for them to have that mentorship, so they can ask about the best practices, or even direction in terms of which lane to take, because that lane, that financial sector is such a wide sector that will give these guys the opportunity to decide which road they want to go down. So it's very vital, man. It also creates the basis for the networking aspect early in their careers.
I applaud you for even having to think so far, thinking futuristic about mentorship and what it is that the opportunities it can open up for so many persons that's coming up in the industry. Now, Gowon, before we go, what is the cost of this boot camp and where can people register?
So it's the same website, nassauconference.com. The boot camp is a half-day session. It's $150 plus VAT. And I think it's important to look that you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so ultimately, our greatest asset in all of our financial services sector participants is the personnel that we have. And so this is an opportunity to put your money where your mouth is, if you will, invest in your people, demonstrate to them that you are giving them an opportunity to get hands-on experience by those who've been there, done that. More importantly, it's an opportunity for you to create the network in which you can't pay for when you think about it in terms of how you get together with other individuals. So this is an opportunity, I'm going to say, as an accountant, I won't say not to look at the cost, but to look at this as an investment as opposed to a sunk cost, that this is actually putting money into the future. And so from that perspective, there's an opportunity to get a significant return on investment.
Well, don't delay on getting that return on your investment. Gowon and Todd, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm 𝗲𝗓𝗧𝗧. It has been a pleasure hosting today's show. Don't forget to follow You and Your Money on Facebook and tune in next week for another exciting episode. Thanks for watching.